The Christian worldview really deals with the question of what is God actually like? What is his plan for the world? How do we flourish? But every other worldview has questions it tries to answer as well. We've looked at some of those. We looked at the Secular Humanist worldview, which asks the question, is God even relevant? We looked at the Marxist worldview. Why does the world seem so unfair? And what we might call the Cosmic Humanist worldview or the new Spiritualist worldview asks the question, why can't we all just get along? When people from this persuasion look around the world and they ask, well, if there is actually a truth and spirituality is really real and God actually exists, why do we have wars? Why do we have riots? Why do we have these things? And why can't we all just get along? And now, most people who embrace this worldview do have some concept of God. And it's interesting to me, have you noticed this in the last couple of years, that talk about God has grown dramatically? I mean, even in the movies, people in the movies now talk about God in the movie. Like I was watching one of my favorite movies, The Avengers. And they talk about God in the movie, and you're like, oh, they talked about God and it wasn't a curse word. It's like, oh, that's amazing. And you see this more and more in different places. In fact, one of my favorite scenes in The Avengers is this one here. So.
The guys are friendly?
Doesn't matter. If he frees Loki or kills him, the Tesseract's lost.
Stark, we need a plan of attack.
I have a plan. Attack.
I'd sit this one out, Cap.
I don't see how I can.
These guys come from legend. They're basically gods.
There's only one god, man. And I'm pretty sure he doesn't dress like that.
Yeah. And that's exactly what happened in the theater too. People are like, woo! Yeah! God! Yeah. It's this remarkable feeling that, wow, this is really cool because finally it's okay to talk about God and we don't have to feel embarrassed about it. We don't have to feel like we're not being smart when we have these kinds of conversations. But when you look a little bit below the surface of what people mean when they use the word God, you find something that's really uncomfortable. In fact, we have found in various studies that 85% of the people surveyed in the United States say they believe in God. But listen to this, 53% of those surveyed say God is not a person, but a cosmic force. Well, that Christian worldview very clearly says that God is a person, that God has self-awareness, that he created us to be aware in that same way that we're made in his image. To say that God is a cosmic force is to say he is more like light and sound or energy than like a person. And when you start thinking about the implications of this, it becomes a pretty dramatic difference, right? In Star Wars, Luke Skywalker is not told, the Force loves you and has a wonderful plan for your life. What is he told? Use the Force, right? Use the Force. A cosmic force is something to be used. A person is something to be loved. And depending on which one of these understandings you have, you go off in very different directions. Well, the worldview we're talking about tonight, the Cosmic Humanist worldview, and we're transitioning to a new term we're trying out, a new spiritualist, because it may make more sense to some people who are interested in spirituality but not interested in religion per se. This term, this idea, this religion is becoming much more popular. You see a lot of different references to it. Some people call it New Age or higher consciousness or Eastern whatever it happens to be, or transcendentalism. Integral vision is another word for it, or spirituality. It's really remarkable to me. I actually saw a study of professors on university campuses, and some 80% of them said they consider themselves to be spiritual people. They don't consider themselves to be religious. And if you look at the ones who actually embrace Christianity, you're really, really narrowed down. When you're looking at those who embrace Christianity and who actually practice Orthodox Christianity, you're down to a very, very small percentage. If you have 1,000 professors at your university, there's a really good chance that only 10 of them will be evangelical Orthodox Christians. Only 10 out of 1,000. So it's a very much a minority viewpoint. But the idea of spirituality is very much a majority viewpoint. Now that's good in the sense that if somebody's at least willing to say, I'm a spiritual person, that gives you a place to begin really good conversations. But what would these conversations consist of? How would you actually talk about this particular worldview? I'd like to share with you 4 different underlying assumptions of the Cosmic Humanist worldview. And as we talk about these 4 things, I'd like to also give you examples along the way. Some of the examples will be from videos, some examples will be from books. Some are things that really began and were very popular in the 1970s, 1980s, 1990s. Some of them are actually very current, things that are happening right now. Some of the names of people we will be talking about in the time we have together are familiar to you. You've heard of these people. You know their influence on the culture around us. So let's take a look at those 4 things, and then we'll take a look at the worldview chart that we talked about at the very beginning of when we started our worldview series, and we'll see if we can identify what a person who's involved in the Cosmic Humanist or New Spiritualist view would say in areas like theology, philosophy, ethics, biology, psychology, sociology, politics, law, economics, and history. Deal? Yes. All right, let's do that. So the first key thing that is a teaching of New Spiritualists, that all New Spiritualists will believe, because there are varieties, there are splinter groups in various factions, just like there are in any perspective. But the first view is that everything is spiritual. Everything is spiritual. Remember, we talked about the Secular Humanist worldview and the Marxist worldview, and they argued that everything is what? Material. Everything is material. Only the material world exists. This worldview says precisely the opposite, that only the spiritual world exists. And you say, how could somebody actually say that? Don't they feel their bodies? Don't they actually know they actually have physical existence? But someone who argues that everything is spiritual is actually making a very different kind of argument than you probably have heard from any other worldview. So let's take a look at it and see if we can make sense of it. Some of you, it might make sense of something that you've actually heard in the movies. In fact, one particular movie series that was made, I'm pretty sure you've seen this, even though it was made when you were really little.
This is the construct. It's our loading program. We can load anything from clothing to equipment, weapons, training simulations, anything we need.
Right now, we're inside a computer program?
Is it really so hard to believe? Your clothes are different, the plugs in your arms and head are gone. Your hair has changed. Your appearance now is what we call residual self-image. It is the mental projection of your digital self.
This isn't real.
What is real? How do you define real? If you're talking about what you can feel, what you can smell, what you can taste and see, then real is simply electrical signals interpreted by your brain.
You remember another point in the movie, there's a little boy dressed as a Buddhist monk and he's bending a spoon. And what does he tell Neo? Do you remember if you've seen the movie? He said, what's the secret? The secret is not bending the spoon. The secret is realizing what? That there is no spoon. Yeah. So you see, but you say, well, wait a second, that's a movie, that's fiction, somebody made that up. But people actually very strongly believe this. This man, the Dalai Lama, is the spiritual leader of the nation of Tibet. And the nation of Tibet is a nation that is essentially occupied by the Chinese right now. People in that country are not free to do everything they would like to be able to do. They would like to be an independent nation, not controlled like most other nations in the world would like to be. But it's an interesting coexistence because this is a very much a Buddhist nation, and the Dalai Lama has written a book about this. He's actually written a number of books, but in one of his books, he said, each of the physical and mental parts of which I am composed is similarly empty of any identifiable existence. Notice what he's saying. He's not saying that we don't exist. He's saying that the parts of which we are composed are empty of any identifiable existence, which is a very complex way of saying, yeah, that your existence is illusory. Our initial reaction to recognizing that things do not possess objective or inherent existence is understandably one of surprise. We are discovering the actual way things exist is so very contrary to how we naturally relate to them. If you've studied Buddhism at all, you know that Buddhism is essentially the path to non-attachment to life. Why would you be non-attached to life? Because the things in life that you think actually have meaning are empty of any identifiable existence. And spiritual enlightenment is recognizing that that is so. So if you see somebody who is suffering, you have to recognize for yourself and for that person that their suffering is meaningless. And if you recognize that their suffering is meaningless, then you don't suffer by watching them suffer, and you recognize that they have to go through the process of recognizing that their suffering is empty of any identifiable existence. It's a very different approach to the problem of suffering, but one that is held by many people all over the world. It's also a view that's very common in India. You know about Hinduism. Hinduism means the religion of India. One of the poems in India that is very famous and a beautifully written poem called the Bhagavad Gita. It's a story. How many of you have actually read that before? You've actually been able to encounter it. All right, a handful of you have been able to see this. Well, it's a poem and it's written in lots of different stanzas. It is a subset of India's national poem, so it's part of a great body of literature that goes back thousands and thousands of years and has an ancient, very valued tradition to people who live in India. In the story, a man named Haruna is getting ready to go out to war. He's going to be battling against his own cousins. He knows he's going to kill them. He's going to kill his own cousins. So he obviously feels guilt about this. He goes out to survey the battlefield with the chariot driver, whose name is Krishna, and Krishna begins to explain what's really going on. Now, what they see in front of them on the battlefield is not what's actually happening in the real spiritual realm. So Krishna goes on to explain what's actually happening in the real spiritual realm, and Aruna comes to realize very quickly that Krishna is not just a chariot driver, he is a god. And he is bringing spiritual information from beyond what humans experience into Aruna's mind to help him grapple with the fact that he's going to go into battle and kill his cousins. Then at one point, Krishna says this: these bodies come to an end, but that vast embodied self is ageless, fathomless, eternal. And eventually, Aruna realizes he will go ahead and kill his cousins, and it's okay because their bodies will come to an end anyway. The only thing that is actually real is what is beyond our ability to understand. That's the Bhagavad Gita.